Hello and welcome to our TemTeam May Edition Cup. This is another Group D battle between Nekoblakii and Wiki Kernel. Now, last week, this was quite the upset. Obviously, Nekoblakii was incredible into, Wiki Kernel was incredible into Nekoblakii. Definitely an impressive fight. Sort of blew us all away with a degree to which Kinu Golzi and a couple of the other key threats like the Valish in the back were able to catch Nekoblakii off guard, with Nekoblakii having potentially a bit too frail a set of tools. This time, though, perhaps we may see a different fight engage itself, as it does appear that both contestants have learned from our past little situation there, as we do see a bit more wind on Nekoblakii's side in comparison to the last time, and generally a bit more of an even more aggressive team, I should say. So as we go into our first picks and bans, we do see that Nekoblakii has immediately banned out that Golzi, definitely respecting it a lot more, given how many things she has that are still weak to electric and melee on her side. We do see the Barnshi ban out from Wiki Kernel as a response. So then, almost immediately after that, we see the Mashuk get picked up, followed by the Kinu Yaller, a very solid opener from Wiki Kernel in response to this. Definitely something Nekoblakii is going to have to break through, but I'm confident that Nekoblakii comes into these kinds of things with a plan, with the tireless Mashuk, more than capable of scaring away a Kinu. It's going to be the sort of thing where Wiki Kernel is going to need to make sure that he makes the most out of these opening turns into this, and is able to, weather the initial salvo that Nekoblakii is going to be levying into him. Like, if we see the Tolkien go in here, Tolkien still feels good. You get the heater on turn 1, that doesn't feel spectacular, but that's basically showering wind pressure into both spots alongside the wastewater, which is a bit harder for Wiki Kernel to handle. It would also guarantee the Mashuk matchup and solidify Nekoblakii into things like Hedgen and Firecoish. It's a reasonable defensive pickup alongside everything else. Instead, we do see the Osiara providing amazing turn 1 pressure thanks to Hurry Wart, giving Aquatic Whirlwind almost immediately. And we do see Wiki Kernel ban the token. This was likely what was going to happen if Nekoblakii did not first pick it, but this just means that Mashuk gets banned out, and now Osiara is happy to just run Ripshot over all these frail attackers in the back on Wiki Kernel's side. So this means that there's kind of a Morton's Fork there, where it's like you swap the Kinu out at this point in anticipation of the wastewater, and either you eat it to the wastewater if you swap in the Mimit, now that that's been picked, or alternately, you're just taking a fat Aquatic Whirlwind to the face, neither of which feel particularly comfortable for Wiki Kernel's lineup to handle. In the meantime, we see the Gallus and the Volphy get picked up there in the back alongside the Amphitheater, so that's definitely a mixed bag of tools for Nekoblakii to bring to the table here. We've got the Volphy that still is going to do a lot in terms of just exhausting. From what I understand, Nekoblakii does run a sweatband rather than a handcuffs. I don't know if that's been changed, obviously, but still means that you get more resilience and sustain out of your Volphy in comparison to the handcuffs that we see. This happens primarily because Plague is a very stamina costly move, as is Bush and Leifelsap these days. So we do see the Firecoish giving us the Firecoish Valash in the back for Wiki Kernel. As game 1 commences, it does look like we're going to have a pretty vibrant little engagement on our hands here. So, as I talked about in pick ban, it looks like a lot of this is going to come down to, does this Kinu stay in? Does it try to face off against Nekoblakii? Or does it swap out? I actually kind of prefer trying to stay in and get a fat beta burst off here, but Wiki Kernel isn't having it. We do see the Valash come in. Can the Valash take a Wastewater and an Aquatic Whirlwind, which is what I'm predicting to come into both of these to come into this spot. We see the Aquatic Whirlwind instead land on the Yowler. Very astonishing to see, as both of the attacks on Nekoblakii's side do go into the Yowler, attempting to hit it instead as it's setting up on the show-off phase. Obviously, that's a very important thing inside there. The turn 1 on Yowler is very predictable. They only tend to have show-off. Nobody tends to have room for clinch in their movesets, which is very important inside that. So from this, the next thing that we can consider is just, is that enough? Like, we now have the threat of a Crystal Spike suplex into the Osiara. I think Serba's combined with a Wastewater will still actually take down this Yowler before it moves. But my next question is, what if the Kinu swaps in again on the Yowler spot? I think that you may not have to worry about that too much. Like, yes, Kinu's a concern to come in there, but I think at this point you kind of just have to go swinging, or alternately you bounce the Valish out to get another Kinu buff onto the Yowler itself, trying to get it to survive the two things that are going in there. Both of those are concerning, but I don't think that it's the sort of thing that you really have to worry about excessively with Nekoblakii. I don't see Wiki Kernel being able to disrupt that set of attacks going in. So, we do see the Kinu come down into the Valish spot. This means that, well, into the Yowler spot, this does give Valish a valuable +1/+1. And in the meantime, the other thing that we wind up seeing here is that it does basically add value to a potential Wastewater out of that Mashuk. Serbatio's Wrath does come down, and yeah, no, both of those weather that fairly effectively. This is probably a good time for the Mashuk, for the OCR to bounce, but it does come at the cost of the Kinu, as we saw there. Still, obviously, the Valish being able to weather a lot of that, but it, it came at a price. You get that Kinu buff off in front of a Mashuk that is more than happy to throw out Wastewaters, then you're going to have a bit of an issue here and there. But we do see double Valish hit the field. Definitely frightening. We do see that it is a Sweatband Valish. And, well, what is pretty obviously, like, most Mimits tend to be either Double Screen or Doppelganger Brooch. We can assume that this is Doppelganger Brooch until proven otherwise, which is generally a pretty viable thing. At this point, losing the Kinu is kind of rough for Wiki Kernel. He did get some buffs off, but only getting 2 Protector buffs off is still kind of an issue. Obviously, that's still HP that didn't go off of the Yowler, but I find that's always a very reductive way of looking at Kinu. So we see what appears to be a Chamomile Gallus come in to eat the hit from that was levied at the Osiara there, getting mirroring procs onto both of our Valishes right now, as the Tireless Uppercut smashes into Valish 1 there. Obviously, the Scavenger still gets some value off of that, but at this point, I mean, this Mashuk is most assuredly online. We're at +2 attack now, and it is most definitely looking to carve this field in twain. The big problem with that, then, is, like, how do you respond as Wiki Kernel? Kinu was kind of your main answer to that, and Kinu's gone. Yowler, at this point, I don't think can properly weather a Tireless Mashuk, and there's still a fully healthy backline of natures that you haven't even been able to deal with yet. A Yowler at 44% with only 1 defensive buff isn't going to be comfortable into that. The Mimit, I think, is probably going to be what has to change the game here. You can swap in the Yowler on the Mimit spot and still have your Quetzaleno synergy for the Gallus, and nothing else is really going to swap in too comfortably to that. The OCR is low enough that you don't really want to risk it. Instead, we do see the Mimit sacrifice a bit of its HP, throwing damage into the Gallus spot as we see the double in on that side. So this does mean that, like, anything that was coming into that spot was going down, but it comes at the cost of the Koish, which I think was very important there. Like, getting some damage on the Mashuk may have been more valuable for Wiki Kernel inside there, just because at this point now you've only got a Mimit and a Yowler against the world, and much of that world is a bunch of things that, well, that walls a Valish, right? Like, a Volfi happily enters this field. Mashuk never has to leave it. And in the meantime, OCR can just get another big fat hit off and see how much damage it can do into either of our two aggressors right here. As the Yowler goes down to 6.1% from an Aquatic Whirlwind, the Crystal Spikes will come back, but it's not enough, as it does appear that this is not an offensively spec'd Mimit, as the Uppercut is just going to come down like a ton of bricks and take out the rest of the Yowler's HP. Nekoblakii taking her sweet time dealing with this Mimit because it's overexerted and there's nothing else to be done, as indeed Wiki Kernel concedes and the first game goes to Nekoblakii. So with our best of twos, there is still a chance for Wiki Kernel to earn some points right now. If he takes it back in the second game and brings it to a 1-1, then both of our contestants here will be going in with 1 point each. So that's the cool part there. The flip side of this is the fact that, I mean, that was honestly pretty devastating. I don't think that Wiki Kernel can afford a draft like that again. Honestly, it felt fairly even, but the challenge was actually playing around the threats that were there. The Mimit not having much in the way of offenses really impeded Wiki Kernel's capacity to press that, due to the fact that, well, I mean, once he took out the Valish, what was actually threatening things on that board? I feel like repositioning with the Mimit and making sure it was still able to be other things would have been a very good call there. I feel like ignoring the Mashuk was a really damning error on Wiki Kernel's side, unfortunately, just due to the fact that, I mean, it wound up tearing apart the rest of the team. Obviously, getting damage onto the Gallus is very important, and Hook Kick is not something that you want to, you know, let happen, but I feel like the Quetzalania was going to be hitting anything into that slot pretty comfortably. Still, though, obviously, these are things that are very easy to examine in the post-hoc, and, you know, I'm not one of our fine players right here, which, incidentally, are into their next game. As we look at this, we do immediately see the Golzi ban again from Nekoblakii. Definitely she's been respecting the Golzi this time around. We do see the Valish first pick out of Wiki Kernel. So this should be interesting. I do still feel, so we see the Mashuk ban. That's another really valuable thing there. I think banning the Mashuk is a very important call there. It does leave the token open, but I think you're fine with that. Like, it sucks, but you have tools against it. Firecoish still being very powerful into that. Firecoish actually still being pretty comfortable on this field. Even if we're staring an Osiara in the face, there's a lot of separate things that you can bring in to help reinforce and support your Firecoish. Hedgin even is still pretty valuable into a lot of this field. It also gives some good answers to things like the Barnshee in the back. I feel like there's more counterplay that's available to Wiki Kernel than banning out the Barnshee there. So we do see the Volfi come in as the second pick from Nekoblakii. This covers a couple bases here, and it also means that this Valish is even more terrified of existing. But the Mashuk was a pretty easy slot in. As we see the Barnshee get banned, this does mean that the Tolkien is allowed to go through. Obviously, Tolkien still is a pretty monstrous threat with a very high base special attack. This combined with Heater means that it's very good at swinging games back around, and we do see it immediately get third picked, with our Mimit and Firecoish picked over by Wiki Kernel and a Gyalis to boot on Nekoblakii's side. It's definitely a very quick draft after the fact. As we see the Fires get picked up, we see the Amphitheater get picked up just to ensure some late game survivability. We tend to see Amphitheater go into the long sort of rounds if it is not attended to quickly and early. And as we enter our game two, yeah, you know what? This looks like a pretty even match, honestly. I feel like Wiki Kernel has attempted to accommodate some of the more frightening things here. Like, if you look at this board, swapping in the Mimit on the Volfi spot, on the Valish spot, means that you copy the Volfi. It means that you, like, eat up that Aquatic Whirlwind very comfortably. Obviously, we have to respect the Blizzard coming into Mashuk. My problem is I don't think that does enough, and Nekoblakii agrees as the token just immediately hits the board. This Heater is going to help the Volfi survive these first few turns. I'm actually surprised that the Valish stayed into Crystal Spikes there. Even if you're not worried about getting trapped, it just feels like you want to conserve it as a threat in the back. The Wastewater coming out as well, however, bringing the token down to 42.5%. And as we look at this, honestly, I like the fact, like, now that Nekoblakii has the token on the board, and it got, I mean, obviously, it did get very heavily punished on the switch-in, but it's not like Valish can punish it this turn, right? Like, there's no way for it to get KO'd before it brings value to the table and throws some wind attacks into the Mashuk spot. There is no wind resist on Wiki Kernel's team, so there's nothing that really feels comfortable eating that hit. With Koish and Hedjin not really feeling enthused in dealing with that. I still like the Mimit swap on the Valor spot, stealing the Volphy there. I feel like stealing Volphy is a very strong play, but I don't know whether that's the play that Wiki Kernel's going to be going for. We've seen him avoid going for that in the past. We do see him go for it this turn though, and that may be the tool that he needs to take down both this Volphy and this Tolkien, though. We know that he runs a pretty chunky Mimit, and Volphy, as a result, is a very strong thing for him to steal. So we see the Tornado come down into the Hedjin. How well is this Hedjin going to take this? Hedjins are usually very offensively spec'd. It goes down to 36.8%, and the Dust Vortex is going to land onto the Mimit, which takes that very comfortably indeed, only going down to 78.7. So yeah, I feel like that defensive swap was very valuable there. I don't always remember how Hold works on Mimit. I'm pretty sure it only has Plague actually available at the moment, but a Plague Microwaves actually still deals a ton to Volphy. Obviously this kind of lets the Tolkien go away scot-free, but I don't know how you really respond to that. You could try just bringing in the Fire Quench on that spot, but if you're trying to go for a Hellfire there, then you're going to be sorely disappointed because Team Elusive is going to make that such a non-move. Like, you can't leave spaces intentionally blank like that. With Team Elusive available there, you have to make sure that you're putting aggression into the Volphy before you're really able to flex with your spread moves, which, I mean, sure, they'll do a lot of damage to most everything else not named Osiara on Nekoblakii side, and they'll probably still do a good amount to Osiara, but you gotta take down this Volphy first. So we see Nekoblakii swap with the Tolkien, correctly assessing that, like, you know, this is not the board you want to continue pressuring with that. It's going to be more valuable elsewhere. We see the Chamomile Gallus come down as Nekoblakii is potentially anticipating threats into that. The Sandstorm comes down as well, taking down the Hedjin, even with the burn. As the Dust Vortex comes into the Gallus spot, with the Mirroring proc once again taking a sizable chunk out of Mimit's health bar there, bringing it down to half health from that. So we see the Fire Quench hit the board as, yeah, I like the Fire Quench here. We still have Valish in the back to get Ketsa synergy. We still have Mashuk in the back to attempt to deal with this Volphy, to attempt to deal with this Osiara. If you can't really foment aggression into it, it's another way for you to deal with that. Obviously, Plague is a concern, but Dust Vortex has been blown, Sandstorm's been blown. Even with Sweatband, Volphy's down to 40% stamina now, so it's not as comfortable just clicking a bunch of moves. So yeah, I feel like things can start trying to turn around here as the Volphy does bounce. And we see the Osiara hit that spot instead. This makes a lot of sense. You want to conserve your Volphy, make sure it doesn't overextend, make sure it doesn't get hit needlessly. The Bush comes down from the Mimit, so if we're seeing a hook kick into that slot, it's not going to be as effective in there. And the Quetzalcoatl goes smashing into the Gallus, taking it out, but without having to deal with any more mirroring coming back from that. Getting the bit of health back on Mimit's obviously going to be very valuable indeed. It's possible that Nekoblakii was also predicting some kind of a bit more aggression into the Osiara, potentially double in on that side, but we've seen Wiki Kernel target the Gallus pretty heavily before, correctly identifying that that thing will just kick their Valish into another dimension and also do a lot to the copied Volphy. So, speaking of which, we do see the Volphy, after a quick reposition, enter the field. The combination of Aquatic Whirlwind and Plague is going to do an absolute ton to this Koish, and it's going to mean that this Valish still doesn't feel comfortable returning to the field. Wiki Kernel is now in the same spot that I said that Nekoblakii was in, of course, only without the Sweatband, meaning it's going to be harder for them to get that stamina back up there on that copied Mimit. Well, copied Volphy, that's the one. What we could see is still just like a Quetzalcoatl and a Plague into the Volphy spot, honestly, because you still have Wastewater to deal with everything else here. The Plague does land on the Koish, and that is down to half health instantly from that. We see the Plague come down into the Osiara instead. Is this a focus into Osiara, perhaps, or is this spread damage out? because the Cerbatia's Wrath is coming down. Is this going to be enough to knock down this Koish, I wonder? Koish are not the strongest things in the world, and it is, with the Cerbatia's Wrath, it is, like, the Koish does go down from 50%, meaning that now Wiki Kernel is left with a Mashuk, a Valish, a Mimit, and a Dream against Nekoblakii's Throng right here. So, we see the Mashuk hit the board. This is obviously the most reasonable one to enter the board. It's got good damage against both of these Tems right here. The problem is, how do you cover the Tolkien? At this point, your Mimit is really not looking so hot. It's like, you know, you've had your slide over exert. It's not looking it's not looking like it's able to respond to that. This does give Nekoblakii time to reposition. Yes, obviously you can hit it next turn, but by that time Tornado's up. And you haven't caught it on the swap in. And more importantly, you're going to be taking an Aquatic Whirlwind to the face, which is precisely what's going to be happening here with the +1 special attack. It takes down the chunky Mimid, even with its strong special defense, going for the hard overexertion and like just willingly taking that wastewater in exchange for a much better position and keeping the Tolkien safe. Obviously, the Tolkien can still potentially go down to another wastewater here, but it's gonna do a lot to this Mashuk before that happens, though. And in the meantime, with the Volfi still safe, still at 69%, nice. We do see that Nekoblakii is in an undeniably advantageous position as we enter our late game here. Wiki Kernel down to 2 Tems, one at 50%, one at near 100%, but not necessarily the Tems you want facing into a Tolkien and a Volfi. Valish Mashuk going straight down from the Tornado from a Handfan Tolkien. The Scavenger may yet save Valish, but going up against the Dust Vortex, it is in no way sufficient, as Wiki Kernel is wiped out in our second game here with Nekoblakii taking it home. Congratulations and well played. Yeah, no, that despite some back and forths there, Nekoblakii really took it back at the end. They're conserving the Volthi, repositioning is necessary. Making sure that the Tolkien didn't just overextend in that early game after getting that wind damage out, saving it for the Mashuk, which was the entire purpose of that Tolkien, is something that we see time and time again, is people bringing and slotting Tolkien specifically to deal with those pesky Mashuks that are going to punch your Volfi into non-existence. Really helped out there, and the defensive typing of Tolkien really helped against the aggression of a Valish in the late game. Combination of those really sealed the deal for Nekoblakii. If you're hungry, of course, for more games, don't worry, we have a lot more on our hands. The next match, as you can see below, is both Mr. Rishi versus SM Fid and Tsubaki-chan versus Nekoblakii in roughly an hour. So yeah, stay tuned and have fun, guys.